Welcome to the Own Your Epic podcast. My name is Jay Dostal, author of the book Own Your Epic, Leadership Lessons in Owning Your Voice and Your Story. In this podcast, I highlight the stories and voices of educators across the country who are making a difference in schools and uncover what makes them exceptional leaders in their field. By sharing the voices and stories of others, we can all learn to appreciate that each of us is the author of our own epic and our experiences are relatable to others, if we are willing to share them. Let's get started on the Own Your Epic process. Welcome to the Own Your Epic podcast. This is Jay Dostal, and I am so excited to have this guest on the podcast today. Made a trip all the way from Nebraska to Arkansas, but he is an outstanding educator, and I'm just excited for everybody to hear his story. So we're going to get this started with, why don't you tell us who you are and what you do?
Hi, well, thank you for having me on. My name is Roan Howard. I'm an 8th grade history teacher from Horizon Middle School in Kearney, Nebraska.
Great. So how long have you been teaching, Roan?
This is year number 20.
20?
Yes.
How's that going for you?
It's going great. I love it. It's still a lot of fun. It's been quite the journey. I've learned lots along the way, trying to get better and better each year. But it's still the best job in the world.
How did you come about going into middle school? I'm a high school guy, so I'm always interested in hearing the stories of how people pick the particular areas and the age of the kids that they teach.
That's a good question. I actually did not want to teach middle school, absolutely at all. I student taught in Amherst, Nebraska, so a little town, and it was 7-12. And the 8th graders were by far my least favorite class to teach. I felt no joy at all. It wasn't very fun. Loved high school. Loved the juniors, seniors, so much fun. But there weren't a lot of social studies jobs around the Kearney area, and there was an opening at Hastings Middle School, and my ex-wife at the time, or my current ex-wife, but anyway, my wife at the time, she's like, hey, you should apply for this job. And I'm like, okay, I will. And I didn't want to. But when I went to this interview, I pulled up, and outside there was hundreds of middle school kids outside, and they had the Civil War Day, and they had Civil War reenactors. They had cannons going off. They were teaching kids how to march. They had medical stations teaching how to amputate body parts. I'm like, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my whole entire life. And I went to the interview, and I fell in love at that moment.
Did you kill the interview?
I think I did all right. I got the job, so it was all right.
Well, Rowan, you and I talked a little bit about this in leading up to this podcast, but the whole point of this podcast is to amplify and share the voices and stories of educators who are in the field. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for you. You obviously had my daughter when she was in middle school, and one of her favorite teachers always came home, was very excited about what she learned in your class and the relationship she built with you. And so I thought this is a perfect opportunity to have someone that I know on the podcast, just to kind of share their story. And so what I want to ask you first is, who are the people who've been like the biggest influence on your life?
I guess lots of influences. I think of it as kind of like being a turtle on a fence post. You don't get to where you are in life unless somebody helps you out. And I've had so much from both my parents, things that they've done and have taught me. My grandparents, my brother has been like a bedrock of support throughout my whole entire life. But when I think about teaching influences, when I was a child, I had cancer, and I missed my whole 2nd grade year going through chemotherapy. And I had a teacher named Mrs. Wickham, and she would come to my house, and she would teach me. And I wasn't like really big into learning back then. I was sick all the time. But this lady dedicated her life and sacrificed. I'll just come try to teach this little punk kid, how to read and write and stuff. And so I didn't really fully appreciate it back then, but as I got older and older, I'm like, wow, that was an amazing thing she did for me. And like most teachers wouldn't do that today. I think of her to start off with, but my biggest influence is probably Sister Ann. And Sister Ann was my 7th grade math teacher at Kearney Catholic. And when I moved from Kimball, Nebraska to Kearney, Nebraska, I went from a small town to a big town. And I was in Horizon, the school where I currently teach, for about a week. And I wasn't fitting in socially, emotionally. It was a tough transition for me, and so my mom switched me to Kearney Catholic. And the very first day I walk in this algebra class, I sit down, kick my feet out, being the cool new guy, and this mean old nun walks by, and she kicks me in the shins. She's like, "Get your feet under your desk." And so I did. And I'm like, wow, I got abused my first day of school here. But you don't mess with Sister Ann. So I just put my feet on the desk, and I got to work. And I wasn't like a studious student. I got in trouble a lot. I didn't have a lot of love outside of, I didn't have a lot of love. And so I tried to get attention and love by being the funny guy and being an idiot. And I did a pretty good job of that. But Sister Ann wouldn't put up for that. And so I'd be in detention a lot. And when I was after school in detention, we talk, and she liked college basketball. And her convent was in Kentucky, so huge Kentucky fan. And I was one of those kids always would talk trash, and always like the opposite of other people do, and just to cause conflict and argue all the time. And so I liked Michigan. That was the Fab Five, right? And so we were arguing about who's better, Michigan or Kentucky. And one day she's like, they were going to play that night, and she said, "Well, if Michigan wins, I'll tell you that you're right, or admit that I was wrong." And I'm like, okay. And it's like 10 o'clock at night, and Michigan beat Kentucky, and my phone rings. And I answer it in my little high seventh grade voice. I'm like, "Hello," and she's like, "You're right." Click, and that was it. And that was awesome. And at school with her, I was always kind of good at math, but I didn't like math or really apply myself. And she's one of those people that inspired me to do my best. And I felt true success. And what I mean by that is I had this thing where she would always call on you if you weren't paying attention, to call you out in front of everybody, right? To make sure you're on task. And so if I knew the answer, I would pretend like I wasn't paying attention. So she'd call me and I'd shove it in her face. Yeah, I'm right. And if I didn't know the answer, I was pretend like I was paying attention, And I think about that moment in those times. And when I think about it now, it's like I knew she knew what was going on if I was not paying attention. The fact is this: she made me look good in front of my peers, and I experienced success in math in a way I'd never really felt before. She talked me into joining the math counts team, as an alternate. But hey, I was still on the math counts team, something I would have never ever done ever. But I did it for Sister Ann because I had these little success moments, and she's somebody that truly cared about me, and that. So the story of Sister Ann, I tell that to people. It's a major reason why I am who I am today and why I became a teacher.
So fascinating. So something you said in there that resonated with me is I was that kid in school too. I was kind of the troublemaker, and both of my parents were teachers, and I knew where the line was, but I was always walking up and crossing over that line just to kind of seek out attention and that sort of thing. How has that, based on your experiences and growing up that way and your experiences with Sister Ann, how has that helped you in the classroom with maybe kids who were very similar to what you and I were like when we were growing up? How does that kind of change how you go about reaching them?
I think it's more empathy and I guess awareness of situations. I realize that kids are kids, and we all behave in ways because of things about our situation, our circumstances. There's a famous quote, hurt people hurt people. And we each have a story. And when kids make mistakes, I don't think of it as the kid making it. It's the behavior and the child are separate. And I feel like through my own experiences, I kind of gravitate towards those kids as well, because there's so many times in life where I go to school with bruises on my face or scratches, and nobody ever asked anything. And if somebody asked something about I probably would have lied about it, But the fact that I felt like a lot of people didn't truly care, and so I'm kind of hypersensitive towards those kids, and I feel like I try to look out for them, and I go out of my way to make those connections with them, and try to find more about their story, and build those relationship connections, and try to make learning more engaging, and bring those successes that they can hopefully experience in my classroom, and have that carry over to other aspects of their life.
So do you feel that you can maybe identify some things in kids that maybe other educators don't, just because of those experiences?
Maybe. I think. I think it's more like I look at through my lens of in my history, and so we each look at life differently. And so I think over the years I've kind of trained my focus and my lens of how I look at life to maybe look for those things, maybe be more hypersensitive to maybe where other people don't see it, and and I guess to be more understandable and have their backs when we talk about students, like in team meetings or whatnot.
Oh, that's good. Let me switch gears a little bit just to kind of get into a little bit of content. But how did you, out of all the secondary teachers always have an opportunity to get a hyper focus on a specific content area that they're interested in. How did that come about to you?
History is just the story aspect. It's, I found it fascinating, and growing up, I loved the wars. Like World War II got me sucked in originally. The guns and the fighting and the killing. I love that aspect of it. And since I liked it so much, I read more about it. I'd watch movies about it, TV shows about it. And then in the classroom, I had success in it, and I was very successful, and I was good at it. And we took those ITBS tests, and I had a 99 percentile in social studies. I'm like, this is what I'm good at. And then I had teachers that we would just read from the book all the time, and it was so boring. And I'm like, I could do a better job than this. And so it's kind of almost like a chip on my shoulder. I feel like I'm worthy. I can do this. I can do a good job. I can do a better job maybe. And so that's what originally got me into teaching, was how I was good at it. I liked it. I was passionate about it, and I liked school too. It was kind of a safe spot for me, even though I did get in trouble. But I did get I experienced love and attention from my peers, So I always had a safe spot in school where I can feel good about myself in certain ways, and so that's kind of what led me down the teaching path originally.
Well, the reason I kind of set you up for that question, because that kind of leads into my next question here about teaching history right now is a very difficult concept because we live in a world where there are different opinions, and I don't want to turn this into a political thing or anything like that, but you talk about keeping your kids safe and letting them have an experience and that sort of thing. How do you go about teaching history in today's society?
That's a really good question. I think part of it, one thing I pride myself on is keeping my personal politics outside of the classroom. It really bothers me when my kids come home and they say that their high school English teacher, oh my gosh, she's such a big Democrat, such a big Republican. I feel like kids should know what their teacher's politics are. That should be separate. And we shouldn't indoctrinate our kids. Another teacher I teach with, Brian Cashlin, we spent a lot of time talking about the presidential election, and this was just the last election, and he overheard a group of girls talking about, who do you think Mr. Howard voted for, and they were both arguing, and they didn't know who I would vote for. And so that comment right there says, I'm doing a pretty good job of keeping my own politics out of it. I want kids to develop their own. I want them to have these discussions with their parents and have be inspired and want to learn more about the process and find out information for themselves and how.
So how do you, a little bit deeper on that, how do you help kids see themselves in history? And I go back to a former English teacher. English teachers, we've been dealing with the canon for years. There's not a lot of diversity in that curriculum. There's obviously a lot of diversity in history, but that maybe doesn't come through a specific textbook that is looking at a specific angle. So how do you reach those kids who are in your class who maybe don't see themselves in history, and how do you go about engaging them in the process of understanding, listen, this is important. It may have had a negative impact on your ancestors or whatever, but it's important for you to know this history because, as I've always been told, you have to know your history so you don't repeat the history.
Right. That's a great question. When I started out as teaching, it was more like, I can do a better job. I'm gonna make it fun, And so I come up with games and activities, simulations. Anytime we can do history instead of just reading about it is always more engaging for students. But as I've gotten better at teaching over the years. You know, I do other things, the things some of my other passions, and the whole social emotional aspect of teaching is something that I'm become really passionate about, and probably the most passionate thing I'm as an educator right now. But so things to bring it back to your question, things like we start off every class with gratitude, and every single day we have a gratitude journal, and I always try to connect that gratitude to what we're learning in class. And so if we were talking about the Bill of Rights, so it could be like the First Amendment. So what's something you're grateful for involving the First Amendment? If we're talking about the Boston Tea Party, for example, you're trying to connect some ways, and that has to do with maybe a boycott or something. And so I try to connect those like life lessoning type things and the history to what they're going through right now, their own experiences. And so, and with that, as well as we do these things called like life lessons. And so we'll learn about, this is a better example, the Boston Tea Party. And when we're done learning about it, we have a spot in their notebook, at the end of their gratitude notebook. So what's something that we learned about the Boston Tea Party that happened in the 1770s that we can connect to our life today in 2022? And I have a moment the kids to reflect on it silently, and they write some things down. And then they stand up and they share it. And they can steal each other's life lessons. Hey, steal wisdom, man, because we're all learning from each other, and we make these connections, and then we share some of these out loud. And it's really powerful and inspiring to see what these kids come up with, because they're 8th graders, and they come up with some pretty insightful stuff. Like, it inspires me, like, wow, that's pretty dang impressive. And so just try and connect it and apply it to their lives today. Whether it be initially those games and the activities I do to try to get them hooked into it, but it's really them reflecting on that learning and applying it to their lives, I think, today.
Okay. All right, Roan. So this is kind of the big question of the podcast. But two very important steps in the Own Your Epic process are to curate and cultivate your story so you can amplify your voice and your story. If you had to choose maybe the most important story, or it could be a series of stories that have impacted your life so far, what would it be?
One story it's pretty important to me. It was one of those, like, be careful what you wish for type things. Growing up my whole life, like with my family, my own insecurities, I always struggled with, not being good enough or being seen as worthy by other people, always wanting unconditional love. And so I was wanting to prove myself. And as a teacher, I was always good, building relationships. I had some charisma in the classroom. And when I first started, I relied a lot on my charisma. Eventually, I became more better with the actual science and the art of teaching, and became a better teacher in that aspect. And one goal I always wanted is to be recognized for your hard work. And I put a lot of time and effort into teaching, and to my family's sacrifice lots of times. And one thing I always wanted to do is like to become Teacher of the Year. And so one year I got the Teacher of the Year award at Kearney Public in like 2017. And I was super honored, really happy to get it. And when I got it, it was kind of interesting because not a lot of people were very happy for me. It felt like I didn't have a lot of it's one of those things with your friends, like you know who they are. Like when things are bent down, they have your back. But it's different too, like when things are really good for you, like how they help you celebrate. And there are a lot of people that didn't tell me congratulations that I thought would. It was kind of just a weird it ended up being like a kind of a sad moment in my life, and in some aspect of it. It's like a lot of people. I had like more people tell me from other schools, "Hey, congratulations! You deserved it." And so like it hurt originally, and then the more I thought about that, as time went on a little bit, it made me realize a lot of things about myself, right? So like about getting validation from other people. Like my worth is not as a human being, as a teacher, is not necessarily by the words of affirmation of other people. We plant seeds all the time as educators, and we don't know the impact we make, and sometimes never at all. And there's so many teachers in my life that have had a big impact on me that I never told them at all, and they made everything type of impact. But in that time though, like I was probably more like there were times in my life, my teaching career beginning, I was kind of more selfish than the stuff I did, like whether it be credit for, I'd have these good ideas, and I probably wouldn't be as open to share them because I would maybe subconsciously or down, I wouldn't want people stealing my thunder or getting credit, you know, and as times have changed and as I've changed my outlook on stuff, I realize it's not about me at all. It's about others and about making other people look good. And I think about Sister Ann and how she made me look good in front of other people. It wasn't about her. It was her making me look good. And in that Teacher of the Year award symbolizes that whole thing for me. Like, it's like, that's not what it's about at all. And the fact that I felt bad when people weren't congratulating me or whatever, and like, it just made me realize how my focus at that moment was completely off. And now I don't care about that at all. And I have this award sitting like in the bottom, like of this little shelf, right? And again, not to brag about it, just to remind me of like, dude, what's most important, man? That stuff's not important at all. What matters is helping other people and doing your job and making other people look good and help them succeed and be the best that they can. And so that's one of those moments, I guess, for me.
I'm so glad that you shared that because, you know, as you were talking about that, it conjured up some feelings that I had when I got when I got a couple of awards, and I almost got that imposter syndrome type feel like, listen, I'm not that good. I just am surrounded by some amazing people who make me a better person. And you know, sometimes it's hard buying into your own hype and that sort of thing. And then when you start buying into your own hype and then people aren't recognizing it, you're like, well, hey, come on, I did all these things. But none of us truly ever do anything. We're not self-made people. We have people around us who have made us better just by being in our presence. And so I'm really glad you shared that, because as I think about that story and I continue to think about my journey moving forward, I've come back to those particular things. And it's not that people aren't happy for you, but I think, I mean, you work with middle school kids all the time. I think adults are just like kids sometimes. You know, they're focused on them and maybe not focused on everything out. And so having those affirmations and giving those affirmations out freely is sometimes very difficult to do. But as an educator, we also know that they are so important to the development of our kids that we also need to extend that same grace to the adults in our lives as well, just to positively affirm them on a regular basis, because you never know what word is going to make your day or break your day. Yeah. So that's so cool. All right, I got it's a big question, but you obviously have been in the classroom for 20 years. These last couple years have been excruciatingly difficult. You know, I've seen it from an administrative level, and my job as a principal is really making sure that I can provide support and resources for my teachers, who can then provide that same support for their students. And so what I wanted to ask you was, you know, we have a situation right now where we have a lot of people who are leaving the profession, and we don't have a lot of people who are coming in to the profession. And I think one of the advantages of having a podcast like this, when we can talk with someone who has been in the profession for as long as you have, is what keeps you going? What is preventing you from leaving the profession? What is what's that advice that you would give our listeners who are listening to this, like, who may be thinking about, you know what, it's just not worth it and I need to leave? What is keeping you in the game?
That's an excellent question. And what keeps me in the game is the impact I make for other people and to help other people. And it's weird. Like, I started in as being like, because I was good in history and I could do a good job, and like I am worthy of this stuff. I can, you know, all these things that come about me originally. And again, I love kids, and it was never like, I was always like, we wanted to help kids, right? But my focus wasn't always, I mean, it was on other things, right? And as my passion now isn't history. Like, I love history, it's fun, it's stories, I love stories, right? But it's about helping kids, and that social emotional aspect is so critical. And when I look at my own life and the path that and the journey that I've had, and my lack of social emotional, like, I guess, experience and knowledge and well-being at times, and the impact that had on me. I do a lot of stuff to go with those passions in classrooms. So I talked about the gratitude stuff and like the life lesson things, but the best thing that I've ever done in the classroom is what's called student appreciation. And I actually got this idea talking from my, at that time, wife. She was going through some issues with alcoholism, and there's this thing called the hot seat she told me about. And so somebody in the AA group, they would sit in front, and then everybody in the group would say like brutal, honest things about what they liked, or things that they did well, things they need to improve on, right? And so she told me the story and how they're so vulnerable in front of that group, and that vulnerability aspect to it. And I'm like, that's really interesting. How can I apply that in my classroom? And so I started this thing called student appreciation. And so what we do is we pick a student every week, randomize these two dice a kid made me, called the dice of destiny. And so I roll the dice of destiny, and then we count numbers, and whatever student lands on, that's a student of the week. And I give every student a note card. And it's to give them the sentence starter. So it would be like, Jay, I appreciate how you ... And so everybody writes a sentence starter, and then everybody fills in the rest. And I spent a lot of time pitching it about, hey, what the benefits, hey, we all have this need to be appreciated. As middle school kids, and it's all human beings, we always worry what other people think. We all have these insecurities, and lots of we always assume people think the worst about us, when in reality, it's far from that. And so I talk about, what it about writing specific things, authentic things, things to build each other up. And so we practice this type of these experiences. And so they write down things they appreciate about that student. And I collect all those note cards, and I type them to a letter. And then at the end of the week, I have that student stand up in front of the class, and you can either read the letter themselves, or usually they have me read it. I'll read the letter out loud. So they stand there in front of their peers, and we read all the nice things other students think about them. And as a teacher, though, it's time consuming for me, but it's a labor of love. And when I read the stuff that other kids write about each other, things that they would never ever say face to face, some of the most authentic, heartwarming, heartbreaking, beautiful things ever. I mean, that's the type of stuff that keeps me going. And when you see that kid in the front of the classroom, and you read what other people write, and you see their expressions and their mannerisms and their body language change and soften and melt, it's the most beautiful thing ever. And then when they go through that experience, the stuff they write about their other peers, like it's amazing how it just spirals and keeps going and going. And I used to, when I first 3 or 4 years of doing this, I kept like statistics. I was just kind of curious what kids thought. So every year I give like surveys, like what do I do well, what can I improve on, and I ask specific questions about the student appreciation. And for those first 3 or 4 years, however long it was, every single kid, 100% of the kids said they liked it, they found value in it, and they should keep doing it. Now, middle school kids too, like they're really protective of our time together, and they don't want those stupid 7th graders doing the stuff that we do because that's special, right? But every single one, 100%. And that's the toughest kids, the kids that don't want to be at school, your straight A kids. I mean, every single kid said that they liked that activity and we should keep doing it. The most amazing thing ever. And so I eventually stopped asking that question because, I know it works. I mean, it's amazing. And every kid, I go to graduations, and I see these letters at graduations. Kids talk to me like, "You keep doing that, right, Mr. Howard?" I'm like, "Oh yeah." And like, you gotta keep. And so they tell me to keep doing it. It's a really beautiful and amazing thing.
That is fascinating. Reminds me of a project. When I was in Kearney, we actually did something at the high school where I had every teacher find that one kid, just one kid, and tell them why they're the reason they come to work every day, and they had to video them. Not them, video the kid. And had all these teachers send these videos back, and as I'm putting together this video, this compilation of all these things, the look on the kid's face just over and over and over again. The power of somebody, an adult, saying to a kid, "Hey, because of you, I love coming to work every day." And I can see that happening in your class when you're reading these letters. That is so powerful because those kids might not get that affirmation from anywhere else. That might be the one time they actually get it. So that is so very powerful. Last question before we go here, but because I'm always on the process of continuing to learn and grow, but what do you need as a teacher? What do you need from your leaders to get through a day, to get us through this really difficult time. And what would the ideal leader be doing for you to support you in this profession?
I'm lucky. I've been lucky enough to be blessed to work with some really awesome administrators, and the coolest thing is, like, one of the best qualities is they don't say no to me. When I have ideas, I feel like they trust me. I've earned some trust over the years, and so they always say yes to my ideas, which is really great. And luckily I haven't burned that trust or abused that yet, and so they haven't had to say no for me for anything. And so, things like me, I want to, start more of a chess club and have these tournaments against the rival middle school and take kids to other tournaments for chess, like in Hastings. And so, having support that way to be creative and to try these things and to put myself in position to fail, but to know that I'm going to have support no matter what, even if I do fail and I can try again, is pretty inspiring, and I appreciate that support a lot. I think more in today's times too, some of the people I work with, I know a lot of it is kind of understanding. Is like we're all in the same boat, and even though they're words, just those those affirmations. Hey, you know what? You're doing a good job. Keep up the good work. You're making a difference, and I think that goes a long way as well too.
That's awesome. Roan, we're at 30 minutes here, which is kind of the breaking time of the podcast. But thank you for spending some time with me and talking about and sharing your voice and your story. Because again, this is the whole point of this podcast. Even with my dog running around and sniffing at us and barking in the background. So for the listeners who heard that, I apologize. Winston's just being a little pill right now. But dude, you're a rock star, and I'm so glad that I had the opportunity to sit down and talk with you and get to know you a little bit more about your story. And I think that it will resonate with a lot of other people, because I think that through our shared experiences, we can find relevance that we can see ourselves in that. And that's part of the reason why connect is my one word for 2022. I feel like we've lost a lot of this connection and just being able to sit down and talk with one another and really see ourselves in the stories that we tell. Now, outside the fact that you are bald with a beard, much like I am as well, which, by the way, I got to get you one of those stickers on there. But this has been so awesome, and thank you very much for participating. Any final words you got?
No, thank you very much for having me, and keep fighting the good fight.
Awesome. Well, folks, that ends this episode of the Own Your Epic podcast. You can check out more on my website at ownyourepic.blogspot.com. Stay tuned for the next episode, and hope you all have a good one. Thank you for joining me on today's podcast. To find out more about Own Your Epic, check out my website at ownyourepic.blogspot.com, where you can purchase my book or subscribe to all the latest blog and podcast updates. Until next time, own your epic and share your voice and your story. It matters and can make a difference in the lives of others.